Imagine this. It is a Tuesday evening, dinner is done, the kitchen is clean, and you have packed the leftovers into containers the way you always do. The spinach from last night, the sausages from Sunday, the rice from the batch you cooked on Monday, because that is just how you manage a busy week. Practical, efficient. You are not wasting food. You are doing exactly what a responsible person does. Tomorrow, you will heat them up and eat well without spending another hour in the kitchen. That habit, that specific, well intentioned habit, is what I need to talk to you about today. Because what heat does to four very specific foods the second time around is something that most people will go their entire lives without ever being told. And the biological process it triggers has been documented in peer reviewed cancer research for decades. This is not about eating perfectly. This is not about overhauling your diet. It is about four specific foods, four specific chemical reactions, and four changes that take no extra time and cost nothing. Let me give you one number before we go any further. The 5-year survival rate for pancreatic cancer, one of the cancers most consistently linked by researchers to dietary carcinogens, is approximately 12%. 12. That is not a disease that responds well to early intervention because it rarely announces itself early. By the time the first symptom appears, the back pain, the unexplained weight loss, the jaundice, the process has often been running silently for years, sometimes a decade. The pancreas does not hurt when it is being damaged. It does not swell. It does not send a signal while the damage is quietly accumulating. The International Agency for Research on Cancer, the IARC, the body within the World Health Organization responsible for classifying cancer risk to humans, has formally classified an entire category of compounds produced during food reheating as probable human carcinogens. These are not theoretical risks. They are documented chemical reactions occurring in ordinary kitchens at ordinary cooking temperatures with foods most families use every single week. What makes this different from most cancer risk conversations is its specificity. This is not about your genetics. It is not about air quality or stress or general lifestyle. It is about four foods, the chemistry of what happens when heat touches them a second time, and four habit changes that the research directly supports. I am Dr. Sophia Reynolds, and I want to be honest with you about why I am making this video. The research on dietary carcinogens is not new. The foundational studies identifying nitrosamines, heterocyclic amines, and lipid oxidation byproducts as probable human carcinogens go back decades. What I kept noticing, both in clinical environments and in every conversation I have been part of around food and long-term health, is that this information has never made it out of academic journals and into the kitchens where it actually matters. People who read peer-reviewed oncology literature know this. People who rely on general nutrition advice, the kind most families actually receive, do not. That gap bothers me in a way I have stopped being able to ignore. What I am going to share today is based on published biochemistry, food science research, and the documented findings of international cancer research organizations. It is educational information, not personalized medical advice, and I will say that again clearly at the end. But it is information I believe every person who cooks at home deserves to understand. I am done staying quiet about it. Before I name a single food, I need to explain what is actually happening at the chemical level when food is reheated. Because without that foundation, this sounds like a list of arbitrary warnings instead of the documented biochemistry it actually is. When food is cooked for the first time, a series of normal chemical reactions occurs. Proteins interact with sugars under heat. Nitrogen-containing compounds interact with available amino acids. Fats begin to oxidize as they are exposed to both heat and oxygen. In most cases, the compounds produced by first-time cooking are present in amounts the body can process and eliminate. This is what cooking looks like chemically when it is working the way it should. Reheating changes the equation in three simultaneous ways. First, whatever antioxidant compounds were present in the original food are further degraded or completely destroyed. The biological buffers that would have partially neutralized harmful compounds during the first cooking cycle are no longer available. Second, the same chemical reactions that produced small amounts of harmful compounds during first cooking are triggered again, but this time without those buffers. The conditions that generate carcinogenic compounds are now unmitigated. Third, During the cooling and storage period between the first and second cooking, bacterial activity and enzymatic reactions within certain foods have already been converting naturally occurring compounds, particularly nitrates in vegetables, into more reactive intermediate forms. Heat then drives those intermediates forward into the specific class of compounds oncology researchers are most focused on: nitroso compounds, also called nitrosamines, and heterocyclic amines. Both have been formally classified by the IARC as probable human carcinogens. Animal studies have provided strong evidence of carcinogenicity across multiple organs, including the pancreas. Research published in peer-reviewed journals has identified dietary nitroso compounds as one of the pathways through which repeated exposure contributes to pancreatic cancer risk. This is the chemical foundation underneath all four foods. The specific chemistry differs by food. The category of documented harm is consistent. Food 1, processed meat, hot dogs, sausages, bacon, ham, deli cuts, smoked meats, any meat that has been cured, preserved, or processed using nitrates and nitrites as a preservative. This is the category most people think they already understand the risks of. And it is also the category where the specific mechanism of reheating risk is almost never explained correctly. Here is what most people do not know. These foods do not begin from a neutral chemical baseline when they arrive in your kitchen. The nitrites added as preservatives during manufacturing react with the amines naturally present in meat protein during the production process itself, before the food ever reaches your refrigerator. The result is nitrosamines, documented carcinogens already present in the food when you purchase it. When you cook processed meat for the first time, you are applying heat to food that already contains these compounds. Cooking at high temperatures accelerates nitrosamine formation. The higher the temperature and the longer the exposure, the more the reaction compounds. When you reheat it, and particularly when you reheat it in a microwave, which produces uneven surface temperatures where some areas scorch at very high heat while others barely warm, you are running that same reaction again on the same food. Without the antioxidant buffers from the first cooking that partially mitigated the first cycle, research examining dietary nitroso compounds and pancreatic cancer risk, published in peer-reviewed oncology literature, found that high dietary intake of these compounds was associated with elevated pancreatic cancer risk. Studies on red and processed meat consumption have identified heterocyclic amines, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, and nitroso compounds produced at high cooking temperatures as key mutagens, compounds capable of causing direct DNA damage. The practical reality is not complicated. If you eat processed meats, eat them fresh and prepared once, at a moderate temperature. Never reheat them, and particularly, do not reheat them on high in a microwave. If they are part of a larger dish, remove the processed meat from the dish before reheating the rest. Food 2, spinach, and other nitrate-rich leafy greens. This is the one that surprises people most. And the reason it surprises them is that everything they have been told about spinach is correct. Spinach is genuinely one of the most nutrient-dense foods you can put on a plate. It is rich in iron, folate, magnesium, vitamin C and K, and a range of antioxidant compounds with documented cardiovascular and anti-inflammatory effects. The research supporting regular spinach consumption is real and extensive. The problem is not spinach. The problem is what happens to the naturally occurring nitrates in spinach during the specific sequence of cooking, cooling, storing, and reheating. And the distinction between fresh spinach, freshly cooked spinach, and reheated cooked spinach is one that nutritional communication has almost entirely failed to make. Here is the mechanism. Spinach contains naturally occurring nitrates, compounds that in fresh spinach are entirely benign and even beneficial for cardiovascular function and blood pressure regulation. When spinach is cooked and then allowed to cool and sit, even in the refrigerator, bacterial activity and enzymatic reactions within the cooked vegetable begin converting those nitrates into nitrites. This conversion is continuous during storage. The longer cooked spinach sits, the higher its nitrite content becomes. When you reheat it, two things happen simultaneously. The heat drives further nitrite formation, and the heat also drives a reaction between those nitrites and the amino acids present in the spinach, producing nitrosamines, the same class of compounds the IARC has classified as probable human carcinogens. A study published in the journal Foods specifically warned against storing boiled spinach for more than 12 hours at room temperature because of this direct nitrate to nitrosamine conversion pathway. The same mechanism applies to other high nitrate vegetables: celery, beetroot, kale, and carrots. Celery, in particular, contains some of the highest concentrations of naturally occurring nitrates of any common vegetable. When celery is cooked into soups and stews and then reheated repeatedly, which is standard practice in most home kitchens, each reheating cycle drives the conversion further. The irony here is precise. The vegetable you are reheating specifically because it is good for you is chemically transforming into something that works against the very protection it was supposed to provide. Not through anything you did wrong, through the chemistry of what heat does to nitrates the second time. The practical adjustment is entirely manageable. Cook spinach and other leafy greens fresh in the amount you plan to eat in that sitting. If you have leftover cooked spinach, eat it cold the following day, in a salad, layered in a sandwich as a cold side. Cold does not drive the nitrosamine forming reaction. Heat does. The nutritional value of cold cooked spinach is largely preserved. The risk of reheated cooked spinach is documented and preventable. If you have stayed with this video this far, you are clearly not someone who is casual about what ends up on your family's table. Most people who watch something like this will finish, close the tab, and never see what comes next. And what comes next, the third and fourth foods, includes the one I think carries the most underappreciated risk in the average kitchen. Not because it is exotic or unusual, because it is present in almost every meal and no one is explaining the chemistry of what happens to it on the second round of heat. If this video is giving you something that will genuinely change how you cook this week, take 1 second and subscribe. If not, this channel will likely never reach you again. The decision takes less time than it took me to say that. Now, food three, cooking oils. Specifically, reheating food that was cooked in oil, or reusing oil that has already been heated once. Most people understand vaguely that reusing frying oil is not ideal. What most people do not understand is the specific biochemistry of why and how that chemistry connects directly to genotoxic risk at the temperatures a home kitchen reaches on an ordinary weeknight. When a cooking oil, particularly a polyunsaturated oil like sunflower, corn, soybean, or canola, is heated to standard cooking temperature, a process called lipid peroxidation begins. The double bonds in polyunsaturated fatty acids react with oxygen and heat to produce a cascade of oxidized compounds. These include aldehydes, particularly one called 4-hydroxynonenal or 4-HNE and acrolein, as well as polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, known as PAHs, and acrylamide in the presence of starchy foods. The word that matters here is genotoxic. These compounds cause direct damage to DNA, not through inflammation or hormonal disruption or immune suppression, through direct interaction with genetic material at the cellular level. When you reheat food that was cooked in oil, anything fried, roasted in oil, sautéed, or when you reuse oil that has already been through one heating cycle, the oxidation process continues from where it left off. Each additional exposure to heat compounds the damage of the previous cycle. The smoke point of the oil, the temperature at which it begins to visibly break down, lowers with each use. The oil reaches its toxic breakdown threshold faster and at lower temperatures with every additional heating. Research examining the formation of heterocyclic amines, PAHs, and acrylamide in cooked foods has found that temperature and cooking duration are the primary determinants of how much of these compounds are produced. The IARC has classified several of the primary compounds produced by repeated oil heating, including acrylamide and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, as probable human carcinogens. There is a specific detail about microwave reheating of fried food worth understanding. When fried food is reheated in a microwave, the surface temperature becomes highly uneven in ways that are invisible. Some areas experience very high localized heat while others barely warm. The areas that reach the highest temperatures produce the highest concentrations of all three classes of harmful compounds, HCAs, PAHs, and acrylamide, and they do so at a microscopic level that produces no visible browning or scorching to tell you it is happening. The practical guidance is direct. Do not reheat fried foods. Eat them once fresh, immediately after cooking. If you must reheat something that was prepared in oil, use an oven at a moderate temperature, around 300 to 325 degrees Fahrenheit, which distributes heat more evenly and reduces the localized scorching that produces the highest compound concentrations. Never reuse frying oil. Discard it after one use. Food 4, rice. And this one is different from everything I have described so far in a way that is important to understand before we get to the risk. The risk from reheated rice is not primarily carcinogenic in the same direct chemical sense as the previous three foods. There are no nitrosamines forming. There are no oxidizing lipids. The mechanism is entirely different, and that difference is exactly why it belongs in this conversation. When cooked rice is left to cool at room temperature, and research shows this is common in households that batch cook rice several days at a time, a bacterium called Bacillus cereus becomes the central concern. Its spores survive the original boiling process and remain dormant in the cooked grain. As the rice cools and sits at room temperature, within the temperature range that supports bacterial growth, those spores germinate and the bacteria multiply. Bacillus cereus produces two types of toxins. The first causes vomiting within a few hours of consumption. The second is produced specifically during the storage phase, not after reheating, and causes gastrointestinal cramping and diarrhea. Here's the detail that almost no one hears in a general conversation about food safety. When you reheat the rice, you kill the bacteria, but the toxins they have already produced are heat stable. They survive full microwave reheating. They survive stovetop reheating. The bacteria are gone. The toxins remain in the food. In the short term, that results in the acute symptoms most people recognize as food poisoning. Unpleasant, occasionally severe, but generally survivable. The long-term mechanism is different, and it operates over a much longer timeline. Repeated low-level exposure to heat-stable bacterial toxins from improperly stored and reheated rice contributes to chronic intestinal inflammation. And chronic inflammation of the gastrointestinal tract is one of the most extensively replicated pathways to gastrointestinal cancers in the epidemiological literature, replicated across multiple populations, multiple study designs, and multiple decades of research. Every time the intestinal lining encounters these heat-stable toxins and mounts an inflammatory response, there is microscopic cellular damage to the mucosal lining. Over years and decades of weekly exposure is the same batch of rice, the same reheating routine, repeated 50 times a year, that accumulated damage creates the cellular environment in which malignant change becomes more likely. The protocol for safe rice storage is specific and entirely practical. After cooking, cool rice quickly, within 1 hour, and move it directly into the refrigerator. Rapid cooling prevents the temperature from remaining in the bacterial growth range long enough for meaningful toxin production. Store refrigerated rice for no more than 24 hours. When reheating, reheat once only, and ensure the rice reaches steaming hot temperature throughout, not just warm on the surface while the center remains cool. Never reheat rice a second time. If you regularly cook rice in large quantities to last the week, change that specific habit. Cook smaller amounts more frequently. The time saved in batch cooking is not proportionate to the cumulative risk of weekly heat-stable toxin exposure across years of the same routine. Let me bring this together, Bert, because I want you leaving this video with a specific, actionable picture. Not anxiety. Not the feeling that your kitchen is a hazard zone. Information. 4 foods. 4 distinct mechanisms. One unifying principle. What heat does to certain compounds the second time is categorically different from what it does the first time. Reheated processed meats produce nitrosamines, compounds the IARC classifies as probable human carcinogens, by accelerating a chemical reaction that was already partially underway from the first cooking. Reheated spinach and nitrate-rich leafy greens convert naturally occurring nitrates into nitrites and then into nitrosamines through a heat-driven reaction that is entirely preventable by eating them cold or cooking them fresh. Reheated cooking oils and fried foods produce an accumulating load of aldehydes, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, and acrylamide, genotoxic compounds that cause direct DNA damage, with each reheating cycle compounding the previous one. Improperly stored and reheated, rice delivers heat-stable bacterial toxins that survive full reheating and, with repeated exposure over years, contribute to the chronic intestinal inflammation that cancer epidemiology has consistently identified as a precursor environment for gastrointestinal malignancy. Now, and this part matters as much as anything I have said today, none of this means that any single reheated meal causes cancer. Cancer develops through cumulative exposure, not single events. What research identifies is a pattern: repeated weekly exposure to specific compounds over years and decades that shifts the cellular environment in a direction that increases risk. You are not starting from zero. You are starting from informed. 4 changes, each one specific, each one practical, each one requiring no new equipment, no new ingredients, and no extra time. Do not reheat processed meats at high temperature. If they are part of a dish, remove them before reheating the rest. Eat cooked spinach and leafy greens cold the following day rather than reheating them. The nutrition is preserved, the risk is eliminated. Discard used cooking oil after one use. Do not reheat fried foods. If you must reheat something cooked in oil, use an oven at moderate heat. Cool rice within 1 hour of cooking, refrigerate it, and reheat it once only, to steaming hot throughout. Those 4 changes, applied consistently to your weekly kitchen habits, are what the research actually supports. Not a new diet, not a supplement protocol, not a fear-driven overhaul. 4 specific habit adjustments in the kitchen you already have. Tell me something in the comments. Which of these 4 foods surprised you most? And which one did you already suspect was a risk, but for an entirely different reason than what the chemistry actually shows? I ask because the gap between what people suspect and what the science documents is different for almost every item on this list, and knowing where that gap is widest shapes every video I make after this one. Your answer matters more than you might think. If this video gave you something that will genuinely change one thing about how you cook this week, share it. Not for this channel. For the person in your life who reheats the leftover sausage every morning before work and has never once thought about what that specific habit is doing at a chemical level. That share may be the most practically useful thing you do for their health today. Next time, we are going to look at 5 breakfast foods that are routinely marketed as heart healthy for adults over 60. And what the research published in the last several years is actually showing about what they do to blood sugar regulation, systemic inflammation, and arterial health in the aging cardiovascular system. Subscribe so that conversation finds you when it comes. One final thing. Everything I have shared today is based on published biochemistry, food science research, and the documented findings of international cancer research organizations, including the World Health Organization's International Agency for Research on Cancer. This is educational information, not personalized medical advice for your specific situation. Cancer is complex, and individual risk depends on many factors I do not know about you. If you have questions about your cancer risk, your diet, or your personal history, please have that conversation with your own physician, who knows your clinical picture, in a way I cannot. I am Dr. Sophia Reynolds. Protect your health with the information your kitchen never came with.